Hello, my name is Tate Hieronymus. Welcome to the Bluff Creek Project Podcast, and I'm your host. Today, I am joined by a friend of mine, Connor Anderson. Welcome to the show, Connor. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How you been?
Oh, I can't complain. Just doing this, doing that, whatever
Sure.
comes my way, I guess.
Yeah.
What have you been up to?
Well, a fair amount, actually. So if people are unfamiliar with who I am, I work at the North American Bigfoot Center up here in Oregon, and we have been busy. We have been doing a lot of field work. I've been going out in the woods, walking a lot of logging roads, and been very busy doing that. It's been an absolute blast these last few months.
Just trying to stay busy. And is it hard to do it with COVID? I don't know how you're doing that with all the COVID aspect going on.
As far as just going out in the woods by myself, it has had no effect on that. So that's been doing fine. And the museum, we don't have a small building, but we've kept the number of people who can come in has been pretty low, and we've been doing fine there as well. And things are getting better. The numbers are going down out here, so restrictions are lifting a little bit, which is nice. But it's all just, it has had zero effect on going out in the woods by myself.
Oh, that's good. Hopefully you don't find like hundreds of people when you go out there. That'd be a bad thing.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Most of the places that I go aren't like real trails, so it's never really a problem. I very rarely run into other hikers walking around out there.
You're like, I'll just climb this tree and jump treetop to treetop. I don't think I'll see anybody up here.
Right. It's the most convenient way to move through the woods for sure. No, I do a lot of just like walking, old unused logging roads. A lot of that.
Yeah.
Do a lot of off-trail stuff when I can. And not a lot of people do that, at least up here. I haven't run into anybody. So, which is great.
That's like the best thing to do, in my opinion.
I agree.
Oh man, that reminds me of the time I was with you in Port. I don't want to say where exactly, but kind of in that Mount Hood area.
Mm-hmm.
And we're hiking back, and it was raining. It was still raining, and I ripped my pants.
Yeah, you got to watch your step on those wet logs, man. They'll move your feet before you want them to.
Yeah, definitely be careful. And I would suggest having good hiking pants and not pants that don't, make sure you have pants that stretch.
Yeah, always trust your pants when you're out there.
I fly by the seat of my pants.
Yeah.
Anyway. So what's like the museum life been up to? You've been on another podcast, you kind of talk about it. So I thought I'd be like, I'm going to do something different. I'm not going to ask how you got the job. I'm just going to ask what is going on and what's different now, for over the past month, I guess, if that makes any sense at the museum.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, things kind of died down for a little bit, like sighting report wise, kind of after when the fires happened last fall, right? But we're starting to get little trickles of information these last few months. There is also, what's really great is the membership is going pretty well, and a lot of those people are kind of local, and they have been going out in the woods, checking spots out for us. There are some people who go out every week, and they come back and stop by the museum on the way home and say, hey, we went here today, we found this stuff. What do you think? And we'll talk about it a little bit and suggest maybe a different place to go or to keep checking back there. So we're building this network of people who are doing this work with us, which is awesome.
Dude, that's like super amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And one of the people we've been in contact with recently, he's a researcher out here. He's been working a spot for about 30 years, give or take, right? And over that time, he's found a lot of footprints. He's had a couple sightings in this area. And he recently came into the museum and basically said, hey, I've been working here. I want you guys to know what I've been finding. Let's work on this together. And so he's kind of let us not take over his spot, but like start working there with him and going out on our own there. And in early January, we got an excited phone call from him saying that he had just found and cast a footprint the day before. So we closed the shop. We went out to try to find it in the dark, which didn't work, surprisingly, or unsurprisingly. It's really hard to find those in the daytime, let alone at night. So because of that, we started going out over and over and over and over again. Like I've been up to there, I don't know, Some weeks, 3 or 4 times a week, drive up after work for a few hours and just walk the roads, get your boots on the ground, do all that sort of thing. And because of that, early last month, I found tracks. I found prints. And the first night we were out there, we found 2. We had enough plaster to cast one of them. So we came back the next day. It turns out there were 8 tracks in a row along this road before we lost the trackway as it cut off the hill. And 2 of them we cast in total. The others were just really very obvious impressions in the mud where like you could see the ferns pressed to the ground and kind of hints of toes in some of these things, but it was kind of a gravelly logging road, so the casts didn't come out too well. But it really goes to show that it's only a matter of time until you find something if you go to the same spot, if it's a good spot, over and over and over and over again. So things have been really busy and really exciting, and it's been just, like I said, it's great. I cannot complain about it at all. It's awesome.
It's like the museum is getting like their own version of the BFRO, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, we've got a whole database of sightings and information that's just, that we're using to try to figure out what these animals are doing, because we're not really interested in the if they're real question. It's like how they exist. What do they do on a daily basis? Where do they go? Why do they go there? Because if we can start figuring that out, we can start predicting their movements, because animals in general are predictable. And these things seem to be that as well. And with enough information from the footprint cast, we can start tracking individuals. The footprint cast that the guy told us about that brought us to this area was about, give or take, 15 inches by 7 or 8 inches, right? Yeah. The ones that I found are approximately the same size. And those 2 footprint finds were less than 2,000 feet apart. There's a good chance that was the same individual just walking up and down that creek. And so we're going to keep checking the roads along that creek for the next few months. And we're probably going to find more tracks pretty soon. But it turns out that these things don't move around as much as people think they do. I don't think that whole migration thing is totally accurate, because a lot of the information, the data that I've seen, points to them staying in small, kind of localized areas.
Would that localized areas would you say that would be the case too when you were in Colorado, from what you were seeing out there as compared to here or in Portland?
Well, I mean, to be fair, I found more footprints on that logging road last month than I did in the entirety of my Colorado work.
Oh, wow.
8 tracks totally beat the record. I think I've found maybe 1 for sure, maybe 3 total tracks in Colorado. So I don't have quite the knowledge base to make an assumption like that for out there, but I think that'd be likely, just based on the clusters of reports that you see in other sighting databases. They're kind of pockets where these things live and hang out a lot, and they move around in that. It's not a quarter mile. It's a pretty decently sized area, but they do seem to keep themselves in those areas.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense too. It's like traveling a long ways like that would be would be kind of hard, I think, on any animal, especially if they have a territory that they're already in and kind of claimed it,
Well, sure. If you've got a good spot with food, why go somewhere else? And exactly. I do think they kind of keep in their areas because they know they can be safe there and they can move around in there. But I should say, I do think they follow the food a little bit in that area. They'll kind of follow like the snow line in the winter, because that's where the other animals go, where the food goes. But for the most part, I think they stay pretty localized.
Do you think do you see more reports where there's a lot of hunting, or do you see a lot of reports where there's a lot of less of hunting?
From the actual animals themselves, I mean, a lot of the reports that I have heard out here have been, road crossings, or somebody will see one kind of briefly through the trees, or not a lot of active hunting. People haven't seen these things, not here. I mean, people have seen them hunting before, obviously, but not a lot of the reports that I've heard recently. There hasn't been anything quite like that.
Yeah, because it made me wonder, because when I had my sighting, when I got that thermal, I showed you the thermal video. There was a lot of hunters out that day and a lot of deer.
Sure.
and it was in an area where there's regular hunting year round, or not year round, but it's seasonal every year.
Right.
So I didn't know if it would be like the same over there. I'm sure every place is different, depending on the animal itself and the location it's in, So, and like you said, following the food too. So wherever there's deer, there's going to be hunters, and wherever there's dead deer or whatever left behind, you're going to have predators like bears or mountain lion or Bigfoot.
Right. And they're just going to come eat whatever they can and even steal deer from people sometimes,
Those rotten bastards.
Yeah. How dare they? How dare they eat their own food?
We're the ones encroaching on their land and taking their food.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's all sorts of good sightings by hunters out here too. People who are hunting and have these things in their rifle scopes, basically, and watch them for a little bit of time.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say they sit there and like watch the Sasquatch for a minute or two until it walks off. So we get reports like that as well.
I was going to say, I bet you guys get a lot of hunters coming in and be like, oh, I saw this thing. It was out here and whatever, or what have you.
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite ones are the stories where hunters come in and they tell us, they've been hunting all their lives. They've been in the woods since they were 3. They've never seen anything like a Sasquatch. They can't be real. But this one time I saw this really big bear that didn't have ears and kind of walked on its back legs and didn't really have a snout. So I don't know what that was. And it was just massive, but Bigfoot's not real. Like I've heard a couple of stories like that, and that kind of cracks me up.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Do you get any people in law enforcement coming in ever?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we do. We get police officers, firefighters, all sorts of people. A lot of veterans.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had sighting reports from, there was a retired Forest Service guy who came in maybe a week or 2 ago who saw a couple, or he saw one. He had a couple things happen in one night, and it freaked him out so much that he actually quit. He quit his job at the Forest Service because it scared him so badly. So we get all sorts of incredible reports from everybody. Yeah, it's fantastic.
I don't know. If I was that guy, I'd want to keep my job and keep trying to find out what this thing was.
Oh, sure. But one thing I've learned a lot is that these things, when people see them, they can be really, really frightening. I know of a couple people who were diehard Bigfoot researchers, and they were going out all the time looking for these animals, and then they actually see one, and it scares them so badly that they just stop and they decide not to do it anymore.
Yeah.
So seeing one apparently can have a quite startling effect on people, which makes sense,
It definitely does. People get emotional over it sometimes too when they talk about what they saw, to people again.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know. At least for me, it's scary to say the least, because it's not natural to see something. For something as rare it's not natural to see it, obviously, in my opinion. So when you're seeing that, you're like, am I really seeing what I'm seeing? So you're freaked out and scared at the same time, but also you have this adrenaline rush that you don't really get. And I think that's what keeps me going. And the fact that I know a lot of my friends do it personally and have encounters, if they were really that dangerous, I don't think they'd be here today. I don't think you'd be. I don't think you'd be where you're at right now if that was the case.
Yeah, so if these things, absolutely. If these things were actively aggressive towards humans, I guarantee you there would not be as many of us around today as there are.
No,
it would have wiped us out a long time ago.
I don't think there would be any reports hardly of these things ever.
Not at all. Not at all.
That would be a pretty scary thing. It's funny, when I was up there, you were like saying, it's one thing talking about going squatching in like a room with a ton of people or at a bar. And it's another thing actually being out there in the wilderness. It's definitely different. It really messes with your mind a little bit, actually.
Yeah, it's really easy to sit in downtown Seattle and say that Bigfoot can't be real. But try doing that at 3:00 in the morning by a campfire by yourself while something's walking around outside your tent. Then you start doubting if you know what you're talking about. Yeah.
You're like, no, these things can't be real. That's definitely a person. But then it does something crazy to you. Then you're like, that's not a person.
Yeah. I really enjoy watching people who don't believe in these animals try to explain away all of the evidence, because they have to make so many assumptions and take so many leaps to just explain away this thing that's just an animal walking around, and it's really interesting watching people kind of fight with that themselves sometimes.
No, it really is. And I think I feel like the people who say that kind of stuff, and don't really give a skeptical thought about it are arrogant people who've probably never been camping a lot or don't really care to go in the woods at all.
Sure.
So they're like arrogant. They're like, yeah, it doesn't exist. But like, if you go out in the forest, you can get lost in like a mile of forest. Like, say there's like a section of forest and it's just 1 mile all the way around, and then the rest is city. You can get lost in a mile of forest super easily.
Absolutely. And especially out here where it's so thick and so dense, it's really easy to get turned around in a very small space.
Yeah. And the fact that there's Bigfoots out there, they know that area so well. I mean, it's, obviously we're not talking about a mile anymore. We're talking about hundreds of miles of forest. Like, if something wants to remain hidden, it very well could be.
Yeah. And I don't think they have to try very hard, because humans are very good at overestimating how good we are at things. There's a lot of that mindset of, if they're real, we should have found them by now. It's like, all right, Phil, go look under that bush. Like, people don't do that very often,
No, it's so true. Like that, it reminds me of like this thing I saw on YouTube where it was people commenting on Twitter about a field goal kick that somebody missed in a college game. And they're like, I could have made that. So they flew several people out to try and make that field goal kick because they said something on Twitter and they couldn't do it.
Right. Exactly.
So that just kind of shows like, people don't really know what they're talking about until they get out there and do it for themselves. Like, if there's so many of them being seen, why can't we find them? Well, go out to the forest and look for yourself. You're not going to see one.
Exactly.
And there's people trying all the time, and sometimes they get skunked out. No pun intended.
Right. Exactly. And let's say you were out there every day for a year. You could be close to one a few times, but if that thing doesn't want to be seen, it's just going to move around you. So the odds of seeing one are low, and people who do see them get very lucky. And I hope to join the ranks of that someday, but hasn't happened yet.
The only sightings I have were not like clear sightings, like I could see face and arms and everything. They're more like at a distance and through a tent. So, I mean, as far as the circumstances that surround those encounters, I think they were Bigfoots, personally. But, I still have yet to have a visual, like, clear encounter as well.
Right. And people in the museum ask us all the time if we've ever seen one. And Cliff says yes, he has. And I say no, I haven't. But we both saw one on a thermal imager from about the same distance away. So I'm still waiting for that, like, 100 feet away, broad daylight. That's what I'm looking for. I mean, and granted, his thermal imager was better than the one I was using, but it's just... it's only a matter of time, I hope, until I see one. But I could do this for 60 more years and never see anything. Most of it is luck. No matter how prepared you are, if there's not one in the valley that doesn't want to mess with you, you're never going to see it.
No, that's the thing. And if you try to go, I mean, and if you even try to, I think hearing one is more common than seeing one. And even that is really difficult to do, try and elicit responses from these things at all.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that you're going to fool them into thinking you're a Sasquatch. I really enjoy going out in the woods and yelling and whooping and making all sorts of Bigfoot noises, but I don't think that's going to work as well as, like, the knocks. I think you can trick them with knocks. I think you can do that. I don't think that they're knocking sticks against trees. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because sometimes the responses are so fast. How did they find a stick and find the tree in 2 seconds to knock back? So maybe they're clapping or doing something with their mouths to, like, make that sound. but I think you can trick them with knocks occasionally. I don't
Oh
think
yeah.
they can. I mean, Cliff put this really well. Like, imagine you and your wife are in your house, right? And you yell to your wife in the other room, "Hey," and then somebody else answers from a different room. Like, you're going to stop talking, you know? And it's like the same thing. Like, if there are two Sasquatch out in the woods and one whoops to the other one, and then a Bigfoot researcher whoops back, they're going to think, oh, that's not who I'm talking to. Let's just lay low and not make any sound, you know?
Yeah. That's
So yeah.
that's a good way to put the way I put it is like I look at it as like going to like a different country and you're not from that country and you're trying to speak Spanish, or like say you go to Mexico and you're trying to speak Spanish, but you're from the US, they're gonna know you don't know any Spanish at all.
Sure.
So I feel like it definitely like speaking a different language, or even like, you know, like when you're doing bird calls or something, a bird's gonna know it's not a bird doing it because they know what a bird sounds like.
Exactly.
Birds know what they sound like. Bigfoots know what they sound like. But right. I definitely agree that you can definitely have a better chance of fooling them with knocks. So
yeah, I think so. Yeah, but again, that's also very rare to even get any sort of interaction like that, I think.
Yeah, it's just you got to be in the right place at the right time, really.
Yep, it really is.
It's literally like
99% luck. Yeah.
Yeah, it's literally like winning the lottery in some cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think you have a better chance of winning the lottery than seeing one or hearing one, maybe.
You might. But I mean, if you buy a lottery ticket every single day, you're eventually going to win something.
Yeah, that's true. And if you
go hiking every single day, you might eventually see something.
Exactly. What's like, I got to ask you, now we're talking about sounds that these creators make. You were on Cliff and Bubba's podcast, Bigfoot and Beyond, and they played the audio that you had of something singing. When I heard that, I was like, dude, that gives me the chills.
It's definitely the scariest sound I've ever recorded in the woods.
It's
just weird. Yeah.
What do they say? Melancholy is the sound, the kind of the feel to it.
It's B minor or something. I forget if it's minor or major. I think it's minor. Yeah.
It sounded so creepy.
It is. Yeah. I mean, I'm not even sure it's singing. I do not know what it is. I have been thinking about this, not like consistently, but every few weeks I'll start thinking about it again, and I don't have a conclusion or even a theory as to what it could be. It has to have been a person. As illogical as that is in the context of the situation, I don't think that Sasquatch culture would have developed the same musical styles as like Western Europe. That seems odd. And this thing sounds, it is musical. It's very musical. It's a very melodic sound. But it just doesn't.
Like,
so weird.
How far was it from you?
I don't know. I don't know exactly where the location of the source of the sound was coming from. I know that the audio recorder was it's been months since I've looked at the actual numbers. These are going to be very rough guesses. The audio recorder was probably a quarter of a mile, maybe a little bit less than that, kind of northeast of where I was. And I didn't hear anything at the time. So whatever had been making the sound was clearly farther to the northeast of where I was. And it does sound like it's loud and kind of far away, just because of the way that, it was kind of buried in the white noise of the general forest sounds. But I mean, the first time I heard it, I thought, oh, that sounds like spooky jazz music. Apparently we weren't alone out there. I'll just not worry about that and not think about it for another year and a half. And then I was just playing around with audio stuff, and I said, hey, Cliff, listen to this weird sound, because he also likes weird sounds in the woods, even if they're not Bigfoot. And I played it, and he was like, oh, that might be one. They apparently sing sometimes. And so it hadn't even crossed my mind that it might be a Sasquatch. And I have heard a couple of other recordings since that podcast I did with them that were similar. I've had some people say, oh yeah, we've heard this sort of thing where we're working, we have some recordings, and I've heard a couple of them, and it is similar, but they all sound clearly much more like animals, where this thing sounds like it's a person, a really big person singing.
That's so weird though.
It is. It's absolutely bizarre. And so
it reminds me of that Finding Bigfoot episode when I can't remember the season or the episode name, but they were talking to a husband and wife, and he plays like music. I want to say like native music when he's like working, and they'll hear something whistling back in that same key, and it's like singing back to them.
Right.
So it made me think of that.
Right. That's what Cliff brought up too when we started talking about it. But when it comes down to it, I didn't see what made the sound. So we're never going to know for sure what made that sound. And as of right now, I'm leaning towards it probably can't be a Sasquatch. As impossible and unlikely as it is for there to have been somebody else out there, I just don't understand how a Sasquatch would make a sound like that. Unless it heard music, unless it heard some campers playing music and just thought, oh, I like that melody, I'm going to start singing that to myself, which I guess is possible.
Yeah.
Apes are weird. They do weird stuff. Gorillas hum when they're eating. Like the capability of a Sasquatch singing like that is plausible, sure. But, I just don't know. I just don't know when it comes down to it. So it's always going to be an unknown thing as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's so weird. And I feel, it's really human-like. And it's like, if it's a human, they have a set of lungs on them, dude.
Yeah, they are yelling very loudly. And one thing that I do find is very interesting is that there's kind of no good place to breathe there. It's like almost the whole musical phrase is one big breath. There's like not really a pause. There are a couple small pauses. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a professional singer. I imagine humans could sing that if they tried, but it's bizarre. It's very weird sounding. It's, again, one of the weirdest things I've ever heard in my life.
What was the elevation like? I mean, because it was higher elevation, that'd be pretty hard to hold a note like that.
Oh, I mean, at this location, it's not that high. I mean, high elevation in Oregon is different from high elevation in Colorado. Like I used to live at a higher elevation than this spot is, and this is one of the higher spots in Oregon. It's like 3,000 or 4,000 feet, give or take.
Oh, that's not very high then.
Yeah, it's not that bad. So I don't think altitude would affect the lung breathing problem there. But yeah, I just don't know. I don't know what it is. It's weird, but I have no idea what it is.
Okay, so, well, if it was a person, what are the odds of other researchers being out there in the same area that you probably don't know would be out there? Because, I mean, that could be a possibility.
I would say the odds would be not great, and I would bet you if there was another Bigfoot nerd out there, they would have been whooping or knocking. And not just singing weird music in the middle of the night. Yeah. So I don't know. It's just one of those things where you have to kind of look at it contextually, and it doesn't neither option makes a lot of sense. But
it doesn't.
Yeah, it's bizarre. It's bizarre. Whether it was a human or a Sasquatch, it's just weird. And I'm never going to know what it was. So I have to kind of assume it was a human,
It's one of those things. You really got to play Occam's razor in this instance, and I don't know what it was, and I don't know. If you've heard reports of Bigfoot singing, but you're not for sure, but people singing, there is people in the area. So I mean, the obvious conclusion would be a person in this case,
right?
Unless you physically saw the thing doing it.
Right. You have to kind of assume based on the fact that we know for a fact that people do exist in Oregon and they do sing in Oregon. It probably was a person who was way off trail, wandering out in kind of the middle of nowhere, just singing to themselves, which is almost weirder and creepier than a Sasquatch. But it's whatever,
It's just one of those things. Like you want it to be Bigfoot, but you just don't want to. You don't want to play a dangerous game where everything is.
I mean, I don't even know if I'd want it to be a Bigfoot. I just don't even. It's such a weird, bizarre thing that I don't know where to categorize it. And
Do you think if it was a Bigfoot?
So much. Yeah.
No.
Like, you go first.
I was gonna say, do you think if it was a Bigfoot, it'd be pretty creepy that they do that?
I think that'd be terrifying. Sure. But Sasquatch do very weird things. They do a lot of weird behaviors that people wouldn't even consider being a Sasquatch behavior. So this, the idea of one singing for fun is not totally impossible.
No, I don't think so.
But I don't, I really don't even know what to say about it. It's just weird. It was a weird sound. We'll never know what it was. And I got to live with that for a while.
Just keep going out there until you hear it again, I guess.
Oh, that's my plan. Yeah.
Then you'll know for sure.
Exactly.
Have you ever thought about call blasting that audio, trying to get it more isolated and trying it and see what happens?
Yes, I have. I've also considered just trying to yell it out in the woods myself.
Oh, wow.
Or taking a recording of somebody doing it and amplifying it, on a computer and then blasting that out. Because if it is a Sasquatch, right, let's just hypothetically say it is a Bigfoot that was singing. Imagine how confused that Bigfoot would be if it heard its own song in the woods. That'd be pretty weird, right?
That would be weird.
Whether or not I think it is a Sasquatch, I'm going to go out there and play that sound or a very similar version of it back into the woods where I heard it to see if anything happens. But,
it can't hurt anything.
Well, right, yeah. And worst case scenario, it's just making an interesting sound, and that might bring one in anyway. So we're gonna see what happens. As soon as we can get back up there, we'll start doing that.
Oh man, so that gave me an idea that I thought would be pretty cool. You guys need to, you and Cliff and whoever need to get a little band out there, just way out there, and set up or something, and just jam on tunes and see what happens. Like a little show in the middle of the woods for nobody.
Oh yeah,
see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, when the thing came into camp out there and did all the stomping around across the road from where it was, I had been playing guitar for 3 hours before and singing loudly and badly into the woods. I think it's a total coincidence, but it is interesting that two weird musical things kind of happened there. So again, I don't know what it is, but I'm not going to stop playing guitar in the woods because that's a great way to pass the time while you're sitting out there. So we'll see what comes out of that.
And that's funny. Okay, so more music stuff with the whole, encounters. There was a gentleman on Facebook who reached out to our Bluff Creek Project. I don't want to say his name, and I don't want to say the location of where exactly we were, or some the people that were doing this, but they were playing a little recorder or flute out there, and sure enough, they got a response for something.
Yeah. I think a lot of that has to do with, you get stories about that sort of thing all over the place, right? And so I think that has to do with their intelligence. They're clearly intelligent and they're clearly very curious. And so when they hear sounds like that out in the woods, these kind of musical notes that they don't hear every day, birds don't sound like that. Deer don't make noises like that. So when people are out there playing music, that seems to bring them in because they're interested about what's going on. And I think that is one of the ways that we're going to not necessarily trick them. That's the one advantage we have, is we know that they're intelligent and curious, and we can kind of use that against them to try to make them fall for stuff like that.
Yeah, I think Les Stroud put it perfectly one time. Is there what was it? Curiously afraid, I think Bigfoots are. I mean, if
sure, I could see that.
It makes sense. You're kind of afraid of what it is, but you're still curious enough to want to check it out to make sure what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. They'll come check it out cautiously. And if if they happen to make noise doing that, then you'll be very aware that they're there.
I think music, utilizing music in the wood is definitely a newer technique that a lot of people aren't really trying, in my opinion. I could be wrong. You might know, but I'm definitely going to be trying that this year and just seeing what happens.
Oh, sure. And, playing music in the woods to bring a Sasquatch in is far from my own idea, right? I always think of that documentary Sasquatch Odyssey, where Henry Franzoni's playing drums out in the woods. Like that's brilliant. If I was patient enough to bring an entire drum kit out there, I would totally do that. But I'm lazy, so I'm just going to bring a guitar. But,
can you see me right now? I got to show you this.
Yes, I can.
So people who are listening won't be able to see this, but you will. So I got this giant bass amp down there.
Oh, look at that.
I'm going to crank that thing up as loud as I can.
Yeah.
And I'm going to play this bad boy and see what I can draw in.
Do it. Or hook up your iPod to it and play whale noises.
Well, I got two. I'm going to bring both amps and just I'll do some Rush covers or something. And hopefully it likes Led Zeppelin. Yeah, I'll do some whale noises or what have you.
Sasquatch is a really big Van Halen fan. So work on Eruption,
Oh my God. What's another weird band they might like? Pink Floyd. I think they'd get into that.
They're probably into Pink Floyd.
I feel like they'd be Grateful Dead fans too.
I was just thinking that as well. Yeah, that's probably scientifically probably into the Grateful Dead. Yeah.
If it's one thing Bobo taught us, Bigfoot's like what he likes, and Bobo loves Grateful Dead. So
there you go.
There's our answer.
There's your answer. We just got to ask him.
Definitely, dude. Definitely. Okay, so I got a question to ask you too.
Yeah.
When Cliff went to film the new Finding Bigfoot episode, what were you left doing? Were you at the museum the whole time, every day?
Oh yeah.
He's like, hey Connor, just stay here.
Well, I mean, that's kind of my job, right? I run the shop. I open and close basically all the time we're open. So if you ever come to the museum, I'll be there. I'll say hi. But when he took off for that, Melissa came in, covered some days too, and it was just like business as usual. But Cliff was off shooting the TV show that we couldn't really talk about.
When did you guys find out that was going to happen?
That is a very good question. It was last summer sometime. I'm very vague on exactly when that all started happening, but it was last summer when that started picking up steam.
Yeah, I kind of heard about it from sources, but they were like, they're not any bad sources. They're good. But this was way after, I'm sure, the whole thing started picking up steam, like you were saying. It was more closer to the time when I think after they filmed it, I'm sure.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
But that's crazy. I mean, man, Cliff might be back on the road again. You might be at the museum full time now.
Oh, I'm already at the museum full time. I've got one of the only full-time Bigfoot gigs in the world. It's awesome.
It's so good, though. I mean, how can you hate it?
Oh, I don't. I say this all the time, and I'll say it until I die. I got incredibly lucky. I've got the best job in the world, and it's just an absolute blast. Every single day is awesome.
Okay, what's your favorite thing when you go into the museum? What's one of your favorite things to look at as the start of your day when you go in?
That is a good question. So I spent a lot of time staring at the Paul Freeman research map in the back room because there isn't a key. He's got all these little notes and symbols kind of all over it with little short little drawings and X's on lines and stuff. And there isn't an explanation saying what all of that is. And I've got a pretty good idea, but I like checking it out every now and then to see if I can. Maybe one day I'll look up and say, "Oh, that's what this means." But
kind of crack it like the Zodiac. You're kind of cracking.
I'm hoping for that. Yeah.
This is
one of these days.
This is what that is, dude. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, something I'm working on. But I mean, everything back there is great. Like every morning as I turn everything on and get the museum ready, I just kind of read through it all again because there's so much good information back there.
It's so cool
I've
though.
been doing that every day for like 7 or 8 months, I am not tired of it yet.
I don't think you'll get tired of it. Just from knowing you and how passionate you are about it. People who are generally passionate about this subject in general wouldn't get tired of it, in my opinion.
Yeah. I'm gonna do this is gonna be the last job I ever have. Like that's how much I'm into this.
This will be the first and last job ever. So you're working on new displays because I saw you guys post some photos up, and then you guys obviously have more stuff like way in the back that's not on display yet. So what's your guys' plans for that?
We have a lot of them. So we add new stuff all the time. We're constantly getting more information in, or new artifacts are coming in, new casts, stuff like that. So we're always kind of thinking about what's the next step and how we're going to improve what we already have back there. And so we've been going through and replacing all of the original displays with these kind of revamped, newer displays as well, adding a bunch of new stuff. We put a whole panel on hoaxes. We've got the original Rant Mullins prints on display now. Those are out there. A lot of stuff like that. We've got a few more. There's kind of a large closet hallway room in the back that we're going to expand into here in the next, few months, give or take. And we're still trying to figure out exactly what we want to put in there. We've got a lot of ideas. I'm not going to say what our plans are in case it all changes, because knowing us, something cool might happen in 2 months and we'll throw everything out the window.
Yeah.
But we've got a lot of good plans. It's only going to be a matter of time until we have to start thinking about how are we going to expand outside of the building. But it's constantly evolving and constantly changing. We want to make it that sort of thing where people can come back every couple months and see something new or learn something new. We're going to start rotating the films in the theater. We've got all sorts of really fun plans in the near future.
Dude, that's going to be awesome. And there is an upstairs, but I don't know if it's like big enough, right, for everything.
The upstairs is it's becoming our basically research laboratory. We've been calling it the war room. We've got upstairs, we have maps, like massive satellite image topographic maps on the walls with like thumbtacks in them. We're keeping track of all the research we're doing. And so that's kind of our little like research center up there for the stuff that we're working on. And it's so cool. It's such a cool job, man.
That's so awesome. And like, okay, is there going to be plans to make that research room up there like a part of the museum, or is that kind of just like behind the scenes stuff more?
It'll probably stay mostly behind the scenes. I'm sure that occasionally we'll let people up there to like work with us for stuff and with stuff, but that's going to be mostly behind the scenes for now. There's only one staircase up there. It's really hard to make it a publicly accessible place, So
yeah, exactly.
We're working on that. Yeah.
Oh God, I'm just blanking right now. What's the scariest thing that's happened when you've been working at the museum? Like, have you got spooked? Like, you got to have those nights where you're off your game for some weird reason.
And what, like Murphy jumps out at me?
Yeah, or something like that. You just something spooks you in there or freaks you out when you're closing.
Not yet. I have yet to have a single moment in the museum where I regret being there alone at night. But also, I'm very used to the building. I spent a lot of time in there, So
like back your hand.
I sure do. I can find my way around there in the dark if I need to. So it's not a very scary place to me.
I found out what we need to do next time I'm up there. Kind of see if you can really find your way in the dark.
Oh yeah, I'm not exaggerating. I could absolutely do that. Yeah.
It sounds like a challenge.
Bring it on. I'll handle it. Walking around in the dark is one of my special talents. It's one of my hobbies. I do it for fun. Doing it inside is going to be no problem.
It's like in a controlled environment too.
Yeah, that'll be a piece of cake.
So what's like on your radar for more research, that kind of ideas that you want to implement in the field? Like, because I had Cliff on a while back, and he mentioned he wanted to try call blasting using infrasound, which
That is correct.
that sounds very, very challenging because the way he described it sounds like you need a lot of things to make it happen. So what kind of things are you hoping to try someday or implement in your research?
Well, that's one of the things on our list. We all get together and talk about what we want to do all the time. Like, there's no downtime at the museum because if we're not working on something for the actual business or, reordering socks or whatever, we're talking about what can we do in the field to make this more likely. And we have been talking a lot about using infrasound because supposedly, theoretically, these animals can use infrasound, right? They use infrasound is the theory to maybe, like other large mammals do, like big cats and stuff, to kind of stun their prey, things like that. There's a great report of somebody who saw a Sasquatch step out of the woods next to a deer, and the Sasquatch yelled at the deer from like 3 feet away, and the deer like froze up for a second, and the Bigfoot walked over, grabbed it, like broke its neck, and tossed it over his shoulder and walked into the woods again. So
good God,
that kind of leans in with that. Maybe they're using infrasound to stun their prey temporarily. And so if they can make infrasound, clearly they can hear infrasound. And so the idea of call blasting with infrasound, I think, could be really interesting. And we have actually started working on making an infrasound generator and an infrasound recorder. So we can go out and start blasting this stuff and start recording this stuff to see if anything out here is making infrasound. And of course, you have a lot of natural things that create infrasound, like, volcanoes and earthquakes and stuff like that, which we do have a giant volcano right here. Maybe we're not going to be able to record anything out here because it might just be constantly infrasound.
I was going to say,
but yeah, I was going to say, like, theoretically, if we record anything with the infrasound recorders, it's going to be worth looking at because there shouldn't be any animals in North America that make that sound. Most of the animals that can do this don't live here. They're in
a zoo. They're in a zoo, yeah.
Right, and the closest zoo to where we're going to use it is very far away. If we can hear the elephants from there, something has gone terribly wrong at the zoo. So that's one of the things we're working on a lot. And a lot of it is also just narrowing down these areas. Like I was saying earlier, we're starting to notice patterns in the locations of these sightings. And they really are in small localized spots. And so once we start finding these spots, you're narrowing down this massive problem into a tiny little pile. So you can start looking in this little haystack for the needle as opposed to the entire hay field. And so we're going to find those places and just go there as often as we can. And that's kind of that's just like a daily thing, right? But as far as big research projects, infrasound is right up there. And I'm working on taking the infrared flashes out of a bunch of trail cameras. That's on my list as well. So we can start putting those out so they don't flash, because the flashes drain the batteries the most. And so theoretically, if you don't have the infrared flash on your trail camera, it could last, several months at a time.
Yeah.
And that's something the guys in the NAWC have been doing. I've heard on their podcast. And oh yeah, that makes sense. You can just leave them out there for longer. So I'm working on doing that with a few of the old ones I have, and we'll string those out in our good spots and see if we get an idea of what's moving through there.
How will that work at night, though? I mean, it would just be dark.
Correct. You sacrifice nighttime shots for 8 months of photographs. But
during the daytime, at least.
During the daytime, yeah, which is totally fine. That's a decent trade, because if we're assuming that, I think a lot of animals can see in the near infrared, because I've seen 1,000 pictures of deer on trail cameras looking directly into the lens.
Yeah,
guys can see it too. I don't think they're as stealthy as humans think that trail cameras are, and so taking out that bright flash, even if it's very faint or just kind of red glows. I mean, I can see the red glow on infrared lights. Like that's, clearly other animals can see that too. So taking that out of the equation should make it a little bit more likely that you start seeing more animals, potentially. But again, it's mostly a numbers game. If it's out there for 8 months, you're more likely to catch a picture of something interesting.
No, definitely, for sure. And going to the infrasound, it's not all that far-fetched, in my opinion, that Bigfoots can do it, because they're pretty big. I mean, you think of like a black bear, or grizzly bear, they're huge. Could almost bigger than a lion sometimes, and lions do infrasound. Elephants do infrasound, so it's not far-fetched that a Bigfoot can do infrasound as well.
Sure. The only problem there is that there aren't any known primates that can really use infrasound. But
there are any primates that are Bigfoot don't play by the rules.
Yeah. Who knows? Who knows what these things can do? And I've heard so many stories of people being just immediately terrified of an area for no good reason. Like that's what infrasound does. It makes you suddenly scared and feel a bit paranoid, and it can cause like visual hallucinations and all sorts of terrifying things. So maybe that explains why people see Sasquatch go invisible. Maybe they're getting hit with a wave of infrasound and their brain thinks the thing disappears, but really it's just your eyes are vibrating so badly that you can't see what's going on anymore. Who knows? So it's possible they make that sound.
No, definitely. And another theory, I mean, what do you think on this? Do you think they can make their eyes glow bioluminescence? I have my own theory on it. But what do you think?
I don't think they can. There's not any sort of, like, logic aside, there's not really a precedent for that in the animal kingdom of an animal making its eyes glow.
Mm-hmm.
And what would the point of that be? To make your eyes glow, because you would just be blinding yourself. It's like, why would you? It's like trying to record audio by putting your microphone in the middle of a speaker and playing jazz music. Like, you're gonna just get jazz music, So the idea of their eyes glowing, I think, it's unlikely. I think they're just very reflective in low light situations. So it looks to us like they might be glowing, but I think it's just reflections. But again, that's my theory.
No, I agree. And it does, logically, like you said, doesn't make any sense, because it would be blinding. And so, for people who think they're, I'll ask this question. Do you think they're a natural being or something supernatural?
I think they are completely flesh and blood, totally normal animals. People every now and then will ask us at the shop, like, hey, do you think Sasquatch is from outer space? And we'll say, well, yeah, but so are we. So, they're just from Earth. They're just normal animals. I think they're big apes. We're not going to know for sure until we have one and we can do the genetics on it. But based on the descriptions and the behavior, they're probably apes. So I'm firmly in the flesh and blood camp until somebody can present evidence to me that changes my mind. But
exactly.
I think they're just animals.
Well, I was going to say, because like it's some people that say they have bioluminescence, I think they're more on the kind of supernatural side, in my opinion. I could be wrong. They could think they can do it, but they're not supernatural. But to something make their eyes glow like that, it would have to be unearthly, nothing natural, like a normal animal, because they just don't do that.
Right. So, I mean, there are plenty of animals that can glow in the dark, but none of them make their eyes glow, because that would just be, again,
ridiculous,
silly. But yeah, we hear all sorts of fun stories about weird things in the woods, and a lot of that gets like glowing orbs of light or hearing telepathic messages, all these things like that. And I kind of think that's just something weird that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And not Bigfoot related, because clearly people are experiencing something odd. But just because you see an orb of light or hear a voice in your head in the woods doesn't mean it's a Sasquatch. If you saw a bright ball of light or heard somebody talking in your head in an old house, you'd think it was a ghost. I think a lot of that is based on the context of the person who's experiencing that. And so clearly something very weird is going on. I'm not going to say that people aren't having these experiences. I just don't think that they are Sasquatch related.
No, I don't think so. And speaking of report, like, okay, what's the craziest far out there report that you've ever heard personally? Whether it's good or bad.
Geez, that's going to take a minute to narrow down. The craziest, most far out report I've ever heard. I mean, we get 3 or 5 reports a week. So we hear a lot of stories. I hear a lot of stories there, tons of stories. There are some that do involve like telepathic thought. There are some that just seem totally bizarre. I haven't heard any stories of them going invisible yet. Not personally, not like not to my face. I haven't heard one of those yet. But I think some of the most bizarre ones I've heard are the ones that I think are real. And it's just the animal is exhibiting some sort of behavior that's really, really bizarre. Some of my favorites, apparently these animals, when they get kind of stressed out, they just freeze. They'll just like stop walking mid-step and just stand there and
they
not
just play
move.
possum.
Yeah, but there's a really good story. These guys told me they were out, dirt biking up in the forest someplace. They got back. It was after dark. They loaded their motorcycles, dirt bikes, whatever. I'm not an outdoor guy. I'm not a sportsman, whatever they're called. They're dirt bikes in the back of their truck, right?
They're motorcycles.
They're motorcycles. They put their little dirt sickles in the back of the back of their truck, and they turned the car on, and the headlights, lit up the road in front of them. And maybe 30 some feet away or whatever it was, there was a Sasquatch. And the second the lights hit it, it stopped and it froze mid-step.
What?
And it didn't really look at them. It just stopped moving. And the 2 guys in the car were like, "Do you see that?" It's like, "Yeah, I see that. Do you see that?" And they were talking back and forth about trying to figure out what this thing was. It was covered in hair. The guy who was describing it did this really good pose with kind of scooped hands, like a really almost classic Patty pose, but with it was brilliant. And then they were saying, as they were sitting there watching this thing, it started like a cartoon character, slowly walking backwards until it got out of view behind a tree, and they never saw it again.
What
So the animal froze and then thought, "I'm just going to sneak out of here," and started moving really slowly. And it probably took a couple minutes to walk from where it was to behind the tree, and then it was gone. And I think that is so hilarious and bizarre and weird. Like, why would you make that up? That's a weird thing to say.
But that's honestly like one of the best things I've ever heard in a sighting.
It's fantastic.
Honestly, it's so good.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The best part is that's not the only story I've heard of an animal that just freezes mid-step when it gets seen.
Oh my God.
The one that saw on the thermal imager, when Matt yelled at it, it froze. It stopped mid-step on one leg, just like this thing that these guys saw. I've heard at least 2 other stories in the last month about ones that froze when they lock eyes with a person. They just stop moving. It's such a weird thing that these animals just apparently do. Like, who would have thunk it? Who'd have thunk it?
And why would you step backwards? That
I don't know. It's weird.
But there's something oddly satisfying about hearing that story, and I don't know what it is, but I loved hearing that.
It's one of my favorites. Those 2 guys were funny. They came in like just right off the mountain. They were covered in dirt. Not the day they saw it. They were out bike riding again, and they came back and they just kind of were like, "Oh yeah, we're just talking about stuff," pointed at shirts, and they just started telling me this story kind of out of nowhere. And I was just trying to scramble to write all the details down as best as I possibly could and ask questions. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I don't know, whatever." And then they left. They just left.
Oh my goodness.
It was bizarre. It was absolutely bizarre. But yeah, I firmly believe that happened to those guys. They were not the kind of people who would have just made that sort of thing up.
No, I think you had to have a little more, I don't know. Yeah, I think to make that up would be a little ridiculous. I don't think it would be that well thought out.
Yeah, they definitely had never heard a story of one freezing in place before. Like they didn't just guess, that's something happened to those guys.
And then obviously from you hearing other reports of that happening, you're like, that if these guys never heard anything before and say that happened and you've heard other things happen, it adds more credibility to it possibly being real and what they saw was a Bigfoot. So
absolutely. Yeah.
That's,
it's
that's super
it's a great.
awesome.
It's one of my favorite stories. I like it a lot.
I'm gonna have to like tell that. That's so good.
Yeah, it's very cool.
I saw Matt Moneymaker was up there. It was before the episode came out. He was up there. I want to say earlier this year, right? I think, or even late last year. But he cut his hair. So did you get to meet Matt then? I think you've met Matt before, right?
Yeah, I've met him a couple times. Well, I don't recall, but yeah, I've met him before. Yeah, he's great. He's funny. He
So
had a
when
mustache when I met him, which was awesome.
yeah, he had that short hair too. It was like, hey,
Yeah,
it's like old Matt is back again.
yeah, he looks great. That's great.
Did you guys go squatching when Matt was there, or was it kind of just more business related?
We didn't go out in the woods. He was doing some work up here, and we had some time to like sit around and kind of eat food on a break. We just chatted a little bit, a bunch of us, but it was cool. I like him a lot. He's very cool. He's a cool guy. Very enthusiastic about what he does, which is excellent.
Very, very enthusiastic and very passionate.
Yeah, he's a passionate guy. You have to be to do this sort of thing for this long.
Almost to a fault, but in a good way.
Oh yeah, he's great. He's great.
He's a lot of fun to be in the forest with when you're squatching. He's quite a character.
Yeah. Yeah, no, like I said, I think he's just fantastic.
No, definitely. So I have to ask this question. It'll be one of the last questions I ask.
Sure.
And because it's the Bluff Creek Project Podcast, we ask this to all of our guests. What do you think of the Patterson Gimlin film? What is your opinion on the film being real, or do you think it could be a hoax?
I don't think there's any way that it could be a hoax. I went to school for film. I used to make movies, right? I have seen what a bad gorilla costume looks like. I have watched the old Planet of the Apes films that came out in 1968 or whatever. The thing in the Patterson film is not a bad ape suit. Like, if that is a costume, it's better than any costume that's been on film in the entire history of movies, especially up to that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if it is a costume, the human that it's on is not shaped like a human. It's built differently because you can see, the fingers and the hands and the elbows moving in the Patterson film. And so it can't be a guy with fake arm extensions, because then the elbows wouldn't work right? The wrists wouldn't work. There are too many. There's no way that it could be a suit. I think it has to be a Sasquatch, because especially when you think about it, if it is a suit, the guy was wearing giant fake feet, but those fake feet had to move the right way that Sasquatch feet do, because we have footprints from that day. Yeah. And so it's just, the odds are it has to be an actual animal. There's no way it's a guy in a suit.
I think to hoax something like that would be quite an undertaking. And if it was a costume, again, quite an undertaking.
Absolutely.
So I definitely agree with you. Any advice you'd give anybody getting into the field of wanting to study Sasquatch, or wanting to get their feet wet? What advice would you give a newcomer into this field?
Read Dr. Meldrum's book. Read it often. Read Grover Krantz's book. Read it often. Read Dr. Bindernagel's books. Read them often. And get into the woods as much as you can. That's the best advice I could possibly give you. You can even forget about the reading the books part, but just get into it as often as you can.
Yeah, dude, I couldn't have said it better, in my opinion.
And I will die on that hill. Read those books, go into the woods, call it a day. Bring those books with you while you go camping, and sit down and read them while you wait for stuff to happen. That's what I do. It's great.
No better way.
Yeah.
I have to do that more often, man. Gotta take some more. It's funny, I ask everybody advice what they'd give newcomers, and even though I've been doing it, it's still always good advice to apply.
Sure.
I think for any person, because you kind of forget about those things.
Yeah, it's really good to go back to kind of the best basics that we have right now. And those guys wrote some books that are very, very good.
Oh, definitely. I agree. Well, thank you, Connor, for taking some time out of your day and joining us on the podcast. It's been a pleasure, my friend.
Yeah, of course. Always glad to be a guest, and it was nice talking to you, man.
Yeah, for sure. It's always a good time.
Absolutely.
So, and yeah, dude. So until next week, we are the Bluff Creek Project Podcast. Have a good night.